Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is Monday, November 18th, 2024. I've been doing a daily countdown of my 366 favorite video games of all time through each day of the year, and coming in at number 44 is Phantasy Star Online, Episode 1 and 2. While PSO is not quite my favorite local multiplayer game ever, it's far and away the greatest couch co-op I've ever played in my life. The game is really comprised of two games, with the same system. First is Episode 1, a port of the Dreamcast game that revolutionized what people thought consoles were capable of, providing true online multiplayer for the first time without using a PC. Episode 2, however, is entirely new content that behaves as a true sequel to the first game. The game is supported online and offline, but I've never actually played the online. I know there's unique stuff to it, but we had the GameCube version of the game, and we never owned the fairly pricey online adapter for that thing, so it just wasn't an option. Thankfully, this game had another thing the Dreamcast version did not: split screen. My siblings and I played an insane amount of this game growing up. We played so much, two of the three of us were approaching the outrageous level cap of 200 when a friend turned off the console, not realizing it was still saving, corrupting the entire save file, and then one of us almost got to the level cap again. Before I really jump into this, I want to give a shout out to my buddy Logan for recording this with me. I haven't owned this game in years, and it's gotten a bit on the expensive side to pick up, but in talking about the channel with him, I learned he's also played an insane amount of this game, and had several characters ready to go to record different things, so we had just the absolute best time recording some multiplayer together. But before I get to that, I do want to touch on the single-player experience. You unfortunately cannot do the story in multiplayer, just grind through all the levels, and that's still way more fun. The story, however, is at least a little interesting. When making your character, you can choose between 3 different classes, with multiple race options for each. Hunter specializes in melee weapons, Ranger specializes in guns and rifles, and Force specializes in spells. The tricky thing about these specializations is that Hunter and Ranger can also use a decent amount of spells sometimes. They have a race option of androids, which cannot use any magic, but do have access to traps. Back in the day, I played an android ranger, so I made one of those again to showcase what my experience was like. I so love my traps, even though they're generally considered worse in almost every way compared to spells, but I will admit the confused trap sometimes had some pretty amazing uses, and androids' abilities to natively see enemy traps, which are normally invisible, are actually quite nice. I'd often scout ahead as my ranger, clearing out traps before we went through more maze-like sections as a group, but I actually did play less of this game than my siblings, so I was often doing content I was under-leveled for, and it was just running through a gauntlet of terrifying enemies that I hoped never caught up with me, and, just like yelling and screaming, and then they would have to come save me, and they're like, "Where did you go?" And it's like, "Open the map." It's like, but you're in the menu. Yeah, good times. The single-player story revolves around an enormous spaceship city, arriving at a planet to colonize it. But upon their arrival, they lose contact with the earlier settlers that scouted out the place initially, and their facility explodes. So the government hires independent contract fighters to go check it all out, and that's where you come in. The story is enacted through taking on contracts to go down to the surface of the planet, looking for items or people, or defeating specific monsters. There's 4 different biomes in Episode 1 and 7 in Episode 2, and they're generally all pretty different, though there is some asset reuse, especially regarding the monster models. The story is a means to an end, and many of the quests are actually a bit hit or miss, but there's a few standouts for sure. The story is absolutely not why we're here though, and despite the insane amount of time we put into the game, I'm not sure we ever actually beat it in its entirety. You see, we're here to kill stuff and get loot. Each character has 6 buttons bound to attacks, abilities, or items. I can't speak to Dreamcast or Xbox layouts, but with GameCube it's B, A, and X, and I cannot say enough amazing things about the GameCube controller. I'll say more amazing things later about the GameCube controller, but then you get to a second set with the same buttons while holding down the right shoulder button. But there's so much more you can do. While holding down the right shoulder again, you can press Y to open a quick menu to swap equipment, or access your entire inventory of usable items, as well as any spells you know. You can also press Z to open a more in-depth menu with a ton of extra things you can access. One of the key things that I cannot understate is so important about this system is that you navigate these menus with the C stick, not the main control stick. This means you're still running around in real time in combat while you're navigating everything, swapping to weapons, helpful against specific types of enemies, or using recovery items, which, especially if you're on a difficulty that's more challenging for your level, can be a stressful yet rewarding experience. Each weapon has a normal attack, a heavy attack, and some have special attacks. Special attacks might be attached to specific weapons, like maybe if you hit with it, it doesn't do as much damage but heals you, or maybe it has a chance of freezing enemies. Or even there's a very small chance with some types of things of it just killing an enemy in one hit, regardless of its health. There's a big rarity system to gear in this game, and it is so exciting when you get a big drop. The highest rarity items are red cubes on the ground. I do want to just say, however, that photon drops suck, and I hate them. It's an important item for online play that's literally useless offline, so it was literally useless to me. And it's a red item, so you see the loot that drops, and you're like, red item! Oh, it's a photon drop. I get so mad every time I see him. One of the great things about the game, though, is this weapon variety. There's a lot of extremely goofy items that behave very differently than most other things. Like there's special weapons that are parasols, or one clearly ripping off the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII, or even a literal guitar. But I've got 2 favorites that stand above the rest. The first is a staff called Hildebear's Cane. Hildebears are giant ape-like monsters that hit like trucks and can shoot fireballs out of their mouths. They're scary and need to be dealt with immediately. Well, with a lot of these cool weapons, you get them for completing quests that combine special drop items to create the cool thing. And this one just shoves the head of one of these things on a staff, and you get to shoot fireballs with it, and it's animated kind of like a Pez dispenser with its mouth just like opening and closing, and it's hilarious. And I'm sad that the force on the memory card Logan brought wasn't high enough level to equip it, even though it's sitting there. He has it, it's ready for him eventually. But by far my favorite weapon in this game is Akiko's frying pan, and also the higher level version, Akiko's wok. They are literally what they sound like, and they're strong, high-level weapons. You literally are just whacking enemies with a cooking utensil, and it's hilarious and amazing. That's where a lot of the charm of Phantasy Star Online lies. The game is not especially complicated, though there's definitely wrinkles within the system. Like, for example, there's a thing called a mag, and mags are, everyone gets one mag, you can equip a mag, and mags have basically, there's a floating little buddy, and this is your buddy. And there's a bunch of different ones. They have different abilities and bonuses and things, and you know, change your stats with them. But you get to feed them items. They're like a mechanical pet. And so you feed them items, and that increases their stats, which actually increase your stats. So you get to super customize your character by customizing your mag as you level them up by feeding items. And some of them also have special bonus effects they do, but at certain levels, based on basically their diet, they learn different special ultra attacks. I forget the exact name, but as you fight, there is a meter next to your health bar that fills. It's like a circle-ish. And so once it's full, you can hold down the right trigger again, and that whole menu is replaced with your special attacks from your mag, and that's a big cutscene attack that often does a whole bunch of things and is really strong, and they're very cool, and each one's very different and very fun. From exploring the same ruins and forests time and time again, to the myriad of enemies, to just the little quirks and charms that don't matter in the slightest, like speeding up and slowing down the warp loading screen, and walking face first into paralysis traps while out of anti-paralysis items, and screaming for the other players to come and heal you. The game is just crazy non-stop fun and full of laughs. And who can forget the engaging boss fights that sometimes feel like I'm fighting the camera more than the enemies themselves? The game is just built for good, goofy times with good, goofy company, like no other game I've ever experienced. Logan and I probably got all of the footage I really needed in like 45 minutes. But I kept finding excuses to just keep going for another 4 hours because I just did not want this nostalgia trip to end. Join me tomorrow as I talk about my 43rd favorite game, where I also thought something was very cool and exciting because it was red.